Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here. Today I'm going to cover part 2 of my series on overtraining, and today's topic is going to be cortisol. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. Alright, on to the topic of cortisol and overtraining. We've known for quite a number of years in exercise science that training beyond a certain threshold, high volumes of training beyond 45 minutes to an hour or so, can produce much larger amounts of cortisol, one of the body's primary stress hormones, as a result of this level of training. And your body tends to produce more of it the higher your workload is. Now, while cortisol is oftentimes seen in the fitness culture as a negative because it's a stress hormone that can break down various tissues for fuel, promotes the body to start using various tissues for fuel, both body fat and potentially muscle protein, so it can have a protein degradation effect. It's important to note that this isn't a fully negative hormone. It's a hormone that your body absolutely has to have for a number of functions, and without it, and if your body didn't respond with cortisol in the way it did, you could actually die. So it actually has a number of very useful purposes for both your health and even your survival. So it isn't a bad hormone. And that's something to keep in mind with all of this. And so as a result of this data that we've known for years, you've seen many fitness gurus, many magazines, and so-called experts will try to tell you not to train longer than 45 minutes or an hour or whatever arbitrary number they come up with based upon their limited understanding of the research and the data. And this also goes back into the magazine subculture's obsession with overtraining coming out of the 80s as a result of Mike Menzer, which I covered in the previous video. Now, the problem with this is that this type of idea pushes people away from what we also know in exercise science to be an effective level of training for inducing tissue hypertrophy or even for gaining maximum strength. And what I mean by that is we've known for many years that the higher the workload and the total tonnage move and the amount of tension that a muscle is subjected to in a given workout, the greater the anabolic response, the more tissue hypertrophy we see. And it's not proportionate, meaning if you double the workload, you're not going to see double the growth. It's going to be very diminished returns. However, the fact of the matter stands that we know this. We've observed it for many years, and it's well known in the bodybuilding world as well. And it's the same for strength athletes. Doing 10 sets of bench press will generally increase your bench press more than doing 3 sets will. It's not going to be a lot more, but it does add up. It's cumulative. It trains the central nervous system. So we have a problem here. So what does the current scientific data say on that? I'm going to link down here below in the comments. I'm going to link at least one of the modern studies for you guys showing you that it has actually been found that there is a positive correlation between cortisol release and the amount of cortisol released along with actual tissue hypertrophy when long-term studies are done. And I believe the one I linked below was a 12-week long study, and there was a general positive trend in the sense that the greater the cortisol response in the test subjects consistently in their workouts, the more muscle they gained over 12 weeks. And that makes sense when you look at the understanding of workload and its relationship to tissue hypertrophy. Where this gets confusing is that people go, yes, but what about this cortisol response? Cortisol will break down muscle tissue and it can be very catabolic. Yes, that's absolutely correct, it can. But again, as I repeat over and over in videos, obsessing over acute hormone responses and their effect on the body is not a wise idea in terms of your bodybuilding goals, and it very rarely yields positive effects to try to manipulate acute hormone response. And what I mean by that in the case of the cortisol is that we're not necessarily trying to produce as much cortisol as we can. It's that what we see is that the more effective a workout is, the byproduct is going to be more cortisol. The greater the workload is, the more cortisol you're going to see produced, and therefore cortisol is indicative of an effective workout. How are we possibly getting a positive benefit out of this additional release of a hormone that can potentially break down muscle tissue? And what people forget is that cortisol is also related to anabolic drive. That immediate catabolic response to the training sends your body into a bit of an alarm mode. And the more cortisol you produce as a result of training, assuming that you can adequately recover and that all factors are there, is going to cause the body to shift into homeostasis. It's going to cause it to have a counter response, and that counter response, in the case of a large amount of tension being placed upon muscles that they're clearly not capable of handling, it's going to put your body into alert mode, and it's going to respond by restructuring and thickening those tissue proteins. And that is how your body is going to respond to that initial large catabolic response. That seems to be the case of how it works. What we actually see in the modern science very much matches what we see in the world of exercise science, what we see in the world of professional sports. And there's a really good correlation there. It seems to make sense. And it doesn't seem to agree at all with the bro science notion that you really need to limit your workout volume and limit your workouts to an hour or less, or any of this nonsense. Because again, what we see both in the laboratory and in these long-term studies, the professional sports world, and decades of bodybuilding, powerlifting, and weightlifting, all three of those completely disagree with the bro science, and they all seem to agree with each other. So it would seem that we have a bit of a winner there, that higher workloads and longer workouts are generally more anabolic. And I'm not saying they always will be, but the general trend there is that greater workloads equal bigger muscles. All right, this is just part 2 in the series. In part 3, I'm going to try to cover a bit about the difference between overtraining and overreaching, and how this plays into modern exercise science and modern sports, and how strength and conditioning coaches and experts differentiate between the two, and how they avoid overtraining while continually pushing athletes into a state of overreaching. And that's all I have for you today on overtraining. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.